If you've never experienced the peculiar joy of managing an outer-orbit maintenance station on your own, imagine trying to keep a vending machine operational in the middle of a thunderstorm, on a roller coaster, in space, while bored out of your skull. That's what Station B412 was, a glorified satellite that spent most of its time pretending to be relevant. My name's Cass Brennar, human, mechanic, reluctant hero. At least I used to be just a mechanic. That day started like any other. I was half awake, chewing on a protein stick that tasted like betrayal and expired cinnamon, watching a rerun of Bake Wars. Planet crumble on the holoscreen when the universe decided to throw a screaming, glowing child through a spatial fracture right onto my desk. She didn't fall through a door, mind you. That would have made some kind of sense. No, she burst through a mid-air rift, like someone had punched a hole in the fabric of reality and tossed her in, gift-wrapped in panic. My protein bar hit the floor. She landed in my lap. Jenka meh de. She shrieked in a language I didn't recognize, eyes wide, silver and faceted like dragonfly wings. Her small fingers clutched my shirt as if I were the last unburned pancake in a doomed galactic diner. Whoa, easy, kid. I said, hands in the air. I don't even babysit cats. Then the second rift opened. 3 figures stepped through this time, all armor and menace, with black visors and rifles that hummed like angry bees. My station's security system pinged once, sighed, and went offline, probably out of embarrassment. Target acquired, one of them barked in standard intergalactic. Retrieve and eliminate witness. Wait, whoa, I didn't see anything. I shouted, scooping the girl up and bolting toward the hatch. She clung to my neck like a barnacle. Technically, I was facing away until you said the word eliminate. That's entrapment. A warning siren wailed in protest as I hit the emergency evac sequence. The entire station groaned like an old dog being asked to chase a comet. Behind me, gunfire sparked across the walls. My mug, best one I had, exploded dramatically. The girl whimpered. We dove into the escape pod. I slammed the hatch shut just as a plasma bolt seared the edge of the frame. The controls flickered. Destination. The onboard AI asked, far too politely for the moment. Anywhere that isn't here. I yelled, fingers flying over the console. Calculating random safe trajectory, the AI said, as if it were deciding between herbal teas. Launching in 5-4. A blast rocked the pod. I hit the manual override and punched the launch. The world smeared. We crashed in what I would later learn was the sacred garden of Elrin, which sounds like a peaceful place, but is actually full of sentient vines with anger issues. The pod skidded, slammed into a tree, bounced, and flipped. When we stopped, I was hanging upside down, seatbelted, blinking at a violet sky. The girl was somehow already standing outside, perfectly fine, patting the pod's exterior like it was a pet she was apologizing to. I staggered out, "Are you okay?" She looked up at me solemnly. "De Jassorain, my name, yours." "Cass," I said, "Cass Brennar, and I'm seriously considering retirement." "Cass," she repeated thoughtfully, then pointed behind me. That's when I noticed the guards. Except these ones were dressed in silver and deep blue, with elegant helms and glowing staffs. They looked less like bounty hunters and more like royal honor guards who moonlighted as opera singers. In the middle of them stood a tall woman whose very presence made the air behave differently. She had long black hair streaked with something that shimmered like starlight. Her skin had a faint opalescent sheen, and her eyes were, well, unsettlingly calm, like someone who'd mastered 17 forms of diplomacy and 5 forms of combat. But the most striking thing, her ears, long arching back like sleek antennae shifting gently with the breeze or emotion. I wasn't sure. The guards raised their weapons. I raised my hands. "Just for the record," I said quickly, "I didn't kidnap the princess. She fell into my office uninvited, and we've been running ever since. Also, if this is your planet, your GPS has serious issues." The woman stepped forward. "You brought her back. You protected her with your life. Who are you, stranger?" "Cass Brennar, interstellar repairman, also occasionally kidnapped by fate." She studied me. Not in the usual scan you for weapons way, but like she was reading a book and trying to decide if she liked the twist. "My name is Usarai," she said finally. "High Sovereign of the Alaran Confederacy. You have returned my daughter to me." Her eyes softened. "You saved my world's future." "Okay," I said, "but I'd really just like to go home now. Shower, possibly file a strongly worded complaint to the universe." She didn't smile. Not quite, but her ears shifted in a way that felt dangerously close to amusement. "No. Sorry. The neural imprint has already formed. The child has bonded to you. You cannot leave her without consequence. I blinked. Are you saying I'm stuck here? She turned to her guards. Escort the protector to his chambers. Make sure he's treated with care. I didn't sign up to be a protector. I called after her as the guards gently herded me away. I'm not even good with plants. Your daughter thinks I'm a toaster. The last thing I saw was the Queen, standing beneath her fluttering banners, watching me go with that same unreadable expression. A mix of gratitude, of curiosity, and I suspected, of plans. The royal palace of the Ilaran Confederacy wasn't a place designed for someone like me. For starters, every corridor shimmered like someone had poured moonlight into glass. The walls pulsed gently with living circuitry, lattices of bioluminescent vines woven into architecture that seemed to breathe. It was beautiful, yes, in the way a dragon might be beautiful moments before it incinerated you. I was escorted, herded, through what I assumed were sacred hallways, past what I knew were confused nobles whispering behind long, flowing sleeves. Their ears flicked in my direction like small flags trying to warn passing ships. "He's wearing cargo pants," I overheard one of them murmur. "With pockets. Scandalous. My new quarters were apparently modest by royal standards. They were larger than my entire orbital station and featured a bath the size of a lake, walls that changed color based on mood, which I later discovered really didn't care for sarcasm, and a voice-activated window that responded to emotional inflection. "Open," I told it, "nothing." "Open," I repeated, still nothing. "I'd like to see the sky, please." It shimmered open. "Okay," I muttered, "so it's one of those windows." A small chime sounded, and a servant entered. A tall, willowy being with eyes like polished stones and the disapproving air of someone who's just learned I put my boots on the bed. "I am Gilex," they said. "Your assigned acclamation liaison. I will be assisting you with integration and instruction." "I see," I replied. "And do you also do coffee?" They stared. "We do not poison our guests." "Okay. Cultural notes. Sarcasm may be fatal." The princess appeared an hour later. Not with fanfare, not with guards. She just materialized at the door as if she'd always been meant to be there. Her hair, impossibly long and threaded with glints of starlight, trailed behind her like a comet's tail. She wore a simple shift of light-weave fabric and the expression of someone both extremely curious and extremely judgmental. She walked straight up to me, poked my arm once, then declared in a very official tone, "Cass, eat now." And that was how I was dragged, by a 6-year-old royal, through 3 kilometers of hallways to the dining hall. If the palace was surreal, the dining hall was its fever dream. Floating dishes circled lazily through the air, steam rising from platters of translucent noodles, cubes of glowing fruit, and what I swore were breathing dumplings. The nobles sat in silence at enormous crescent-shaped tables, watching as I was seated not at the end, but beside the queen herself. Usurai nodded at me once. "You are adapting." "Well, I only screamed once during my sonic shower this morning, so I'd say progress." The princess giggled, an actual giggle, bright and delighted. The entire room froze, eyebrows and ears raised, jaws tightened. Usurai's eyes shifted almost imperceptibly toward her daughter, then back to me. "She has not laughed in many cycles," the queen said softly. I blinked. "Well, then maybe you just need more near-death sarcasm and less political poetry." She tilted her head. "You joke. It's a coping mechanism. You should try it, especially when your toast hisses at you." That was not toast. See, that's the problem right there. I looked around at the silent, watching nobles, all of them still stunned by the princess's giggle. The child herself was now drawing a stick figure of me on a fruit rind using her juice straw. "Tell me," Usurai said, after the princess was ushered away to her evening lessons. "What happened when she appeared in your station? Spare no detail." I told her about the rift, the pursuers, the chase. I even mentioned how I nearly tripped over my own boots trying to activate the pod. She listened without interruption, her long ears tilting just slightly every time I veered into exaggeration. When I finished, she asked, "Do you know why they targeted her?" I assumed it was a general, kidnap royalty, demand cash kind of thing. Her face didn't move, but the mood in the room changed. The air was tighter. The lights dimmed as if reacting to her emotions. "The Krill Dominion seeks not ransom," she said. "They seek obliteration of culture, of future, of bloodlines." "Right," I said, "so not negotiators." She studied me again with that unnerving stillness of someone who could probably outstare a statue. "You protected her. Why?" I shrugged. Instinct, look, I'm not a soldier, I fix things, mostly vents, sometimes coffee machines. But a scared kid shows up in my office. I don't ask species or politics. I just run. Silence stretched between us. Then unexpectedly she said, "Your instincts are rare." Thanks. I once followed them into a spaceport dumpster looking for a sandwich. That didn't go as well. Her lips twitched, just barely. It might have been a smile or gas, I wasn't sure. Later that night, I wandered the palace halls in search of something that wouldn't judge me for wearing slippers shaped like frogs. They were a gift from the princess, apparently a royal tradition. I ended up on a balcony overlooking the city. Spiraling towers lit by bioluminescent ribbons, sky-steel bridges that arced between floating spires, and tiny glider craft drifting through the night like fireflies. The princess appeared again, this time holding a long, humming strand of something that looked suspiciously like a pet noodle. "It's called a lizor. It sings." "Right," I said, as the creature made a sound like a kazoo underwater. "Lovely." She leaned against me. "Stay." It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a request. It was the soft declaration of a child whose world had cracked and somehow decided I was the glue. My heart did an uncomfortable little twist. "I'll try," I said. Behind us, hidden in shadows, I felt rather than saw the queen watching again. Not as a sovereign, but as a mother, I tried to leave. I really, genuinely did. I even made it to the docking bay with a protein bar, 2 maps, and an optimistic goodbye note I'd left under my pillow. It said, "Dear Royalty, this has all been deeply confusing. Thanks for the noodle pet. Please don't vaporize me. Love, Cass." Unfortunately, as I approached the last hallway before freedom, I ran face first into a force field and bounced off like an undercooked pancake. Dignity, 0. Nose, sore. "Restricted area," said a guard behind me, sounding equal parts bored and apologetic. "Right," I muttered, brushing myself off. "Must have taken a wrong turn at please let me go." The guard didn't laugh. Illyrian guards never laugh. I'm beginning to suspect it's part of their training. Along with staring through you like they're reading your thoughts and judging your lunch choices. Back in my quarters, I paced. The neural bond thing was apparently still in effect, meaning the princess, Dea Jassorain, or Z, as I'd started calling her, would suffer separation distress if I left the planet. Apparently, some kind of quantum entanglement had fused our biofields during the crash. "Rare," Gilex had informed me in the dry tone of someone discussing weather. "Not dangerous, but inconvenient." "Inconvenient," I'd repeated. "I can't even pee in private anymore. She senses things." "It is a sacred bond." She giggled for 20 minutes because I sneezed in the bath. A sacred bond. Now stuck in a golden prison with mood-responsive curtains, I did the only logical thing. Tried to hotwire the royal shuttle. It did not go well. Turns out, Illyrian tech isn't fond of improvisation. The shuttle scanned my genetic profile, played a shrieking alarm, and triggered an anti-theft foam that hardened instantly around my legs. I was halfway to being a modern art installation when Queen Usserai herself appeared. She didn't speak. Not at first. Just stood there, arms crossed, ears tilted slightly downward in what I was starting to recognize as her version of a sigh. "Well," I said from inside my foam casing. "I was hoping to surprise you. Mission accomplished." She approached slowly. "Why do you wish to leave?" "Because I'm not royalty. I'm not a soldier. I'm a guy with a wrench and a history of poor life choices. You are bonded to the future heir of my people." "By accident." Usserai tilted her head. "And yet you protect her, feed her, teach her strange earth games involving socks." "She started the sock war," I muttered. The queen's eyes flicked upward. "She laughs more now, speaks more, even sleeps." I paused. She wasn't sleeping. Usserai didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached out, placed her fingers against the foam, and whispered something. The material melted like sugar in the rain. "If you must run," she said quietly, "wait until the tether weakens, until it is safe. Not for me, for her." There was something in her voice, something old and tired and raw wrapped in all the royal polish. I didn't respond. I just nodded and stayed. Life in the palace adjusted around me like a lazy orbit. Z insisted on dragging me to her lessons. Ancient diplomacy, fleet tactics, sacred history, and one class I swear was just about how to make eye contact intimidating. I sat through all of it, doodling spaceships in the margins while the instructors made tight smiles. Her tutor, an elderly scholar named Voss Rick, took a liking to me after I corrected his description of an Earth slingshot. "It's not a primitive weapon," I argued. "It's strategic elastic geometry." He nodded gravely, Your people are masters of nonsense physics. Yes, I agreed. We call it engineering. Z blossomed. The tight, silent child I'd first met now laughed freely, occasionally got in trouble, once by releasing a pod of floating beetles into the library, and called me Casser the Brave, even when I tripped over palace rugs. The nobles watched this with fascination and horror. To them, I was still a wild card, a space mechanic with coffee stains and questionable fashion sense who now had the ear of the crown princess. One particularly scowly lord, Dren Val, started showing up to our training sessions just to glare. His ears wiggled like they were about to file a complaint. "Why does he stare like that?" I whispered to Z. "He thinks you will marry into the bloodline," she whispered back. I choked. "Marry? I'm not even qualified to babysit your solar panels." Z grinned. "You'd make a funny prince." Then came the bird. It crashed into my window at dawn, leaving behind a smear of cosmic feathers and a metal cylinder. Not your average delivery bird. This one had cybernetic wings and a retinal scanner in its beak. The message inside was encrypted in a Laren code, but not military grade, sloppy, rushed. It took me 20 minutes to hack and another 5 to realize what it was: intercepted transmissions from inside the palace. Someone had been tracking Z's location, feeding coordinates off-world, reporting her activities and mine. My stomach dropped. The rift, the hunters, the forced bond. It hadn't been random, it had been arranged. "Someone sold her out," I muttered aloud. "Someone here." I took the message straight to Usurai. Her face was unreadable as I spoke, but the shifting lights in her chambers dimmed to an ominous gray. When I finished, she didn't gasp or shout. She only said, "I suspected." That threw me. "You knew." I feared, but fear without proof is shadow chasing. Now we have more than shadows. I glanced at the letter again. "What do we do?" Usurai looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "We plan, but there is an art to paranoia. The trick is not looking paranoid. This is harder than it sounds when you're being followed by a floating teacup that's definitely spying on you." At first, I thought I was being dramatic. Maybe the palace tea trays really did float autonomously and whisper to themselves in binary when no one was looking. But when the teacup blinked, yes, blinked, before disappearing behind a tapestry, I knew. Someone was watching me. And if they were watching me, they were watching Z. So I decided to do something bold, reckless, possibly illegal depending on how a Laren law classified unsanctioned impromptu royal balls for espionage exposure. I threw a party. Now let me explain. I didn't want to. If I had my way, we'd have set up a surveillance sting operation involving camouflage cloaks and laser tripwires. But Queen Usurai, upon hearing my plan, said only, "Subtlety is a language my enemies respect, but spectacle is the one they understand." Which is how I ended up in formal wear that glittered like a broken star and shoes that made squeaking noises no matter how much I threatened them. Gilex had insisted this was ceremonial. "The squeak is traditional," they assured me. "It announces purity of intent." "It announces my location every 4 seconds, I muttered. The royal hall was transformed for the occasion. Bioluminescent banners draped across the vaulted ceiling, casting shadows that moved like dancers. A floating orchestra tuned instruments made from glowing crystal reeds. I wasn't sure whether I was planning a trap or starring in an interstellar fashion opera. Guests poured in, nobles in robes that shimmered like liquid light, diplomats whose faces projected polite emotion via nanomasks, and one enormous gelatinous entity named Ambassador Groob who insisted on greeting me by gently squishing my cheeks. "I admire your molecular integrity," Groob burbled. Thanks, you too." Queen Usurai appeared in a gown the color of midnight over oceans, her ears adorned with faintly humming latticework that buzzed like distant constellations. She moved with the kind of grace that made me briefly forget I was technically bait. Then Z arrived. She was dressed in ceremonial heir's robes, silver, embroidered with solar glyphs, her hair braided with tiny lights that flickered like stars caught in netting. She walked like a ruler, but her eyes searched for me, and when they found me, she smiled, wide and simple and real. "Cass," she whispered, coming to my side, "why does everyone look like statues?" "Because they're full of dessert and bad intentions. And you're full of, mostly confusion and bread." The plan was simple. Set a trap, trigger a leak, watch who moves. The real complexity lay in keeping the party just distracting enough that no one noticed we were watching them. I handed Groob a slice of cake and asked him to accidentally spill his biometric fluid on a suspect noble's cloak. Groob was very excited, the noble less so. Meanwhile, I'd bribed the palace's master of music to play the same melody 3 times in a row, an old spy signal used during the second skirmish of Velour IV. I waited. Nothing happened. Then, as the third refrain began, a guard moved. Just one. He stepped away from his post, veered subtly toward a side corridor that led to restricted sections of the palace, and tapped a small communicator hidden under his collar. It was fast, too fast. If I'd blinked, I would have missed it. I leaned toward the queen. "We have him." "I see," she said softly. "He is not alone." She was right. Across the hall, 2 other figures adjusted position. Casual, coordinated. Predators in silk. "Now what?" I asked. "We let them think they've succeeded." The bait we dangled was a fake transmission, cleverly encoded and accidentally accessible through the palace's lesser systems. Information claiming Z would be transferred to a hidden sanctuary off-world for safety. The moment that message was activated, the spies would act. And act they did. I was halfway through a slow dance with a vaguely mechanical ambassador who kept misinterpreting my arm movements as hostile intent when the lights flickered. Gasps. The orchestra went silent, the banners dimmed. An alarm began to pulse from the upper dome. Z was gone. For 3 full seconds I panicked, my brain filled with ice. But then I remembered she was with Voss Rick, the scholar. And Voss Rick had agreed to play his part. I sprinted. Through twisting hallways, down through service corridors, and into the memory archive wing, where security was conveniently weakest tonight. Sure enough, the traitor guard and his 2 accomplices stood before the sealed stasis vaults, frantically trying to override the lock. "You're late," I called out. They turned, stunned. "I brought party favors," I added, then pulled the trigger on my micropulse jammer. Their weapons shorted out in a flash of static and a smell like overcooked spinach. The queen appeared behind me with 6 guards. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You betrayed your oaths." One of the traitors spat. "The Krill offer truth, unity, you let weakness fester." Queen Usarai's ears went flat. Her gaze didn't waver. "You do not speak for unity. You sold a child." He lunged, and she dropped him in one move, a silent blur of motion that ended with the traitor unconscious at her feet. I stared. "Remind me never to argue with you about dessert." She turned toward me, breathing controlled. "It is done." "Is it?" "Not quite." Back in the hall, I found Z hiding behind Groob, who had apparently decided that bodyguard duty was a sacred honor. "Cass," Z said, her voice small, "did we win?" I knelt beside her. "We caught the bad guys. But there'll be more." "Maybe, but I'm here. And your mom. She's the scariest good person I've ever met." Z smiled faintly. "Then we'll be okay." "Yeah," I said, "we will." That night I stood on the balcony, watching the stars above Alarin swirl like painted fire. The queen joined me after a time, silent, watching. "You handled yourself well," she said. "I winged it." "You survived. That is more than most." I glanced at her. Her profile was silver-edged in the moonlight. Her ears twitched slightly, thoughtful. "This isn't going to end, is it?" I asked. "No," she said, "but it has begun to turn." I looked out again. The sky felt different, heavier, like the gravity of something larger had shifted. I had come here by accident. Now I was choosing to stay. It's hard to throw a victory party when you've just unmasked 3 palace traitors and narrowly avoided an assassination. But the Alarin people believed in celebration as a form of defiance. "Joy is resistance," Gilex told me matter-of-factly as they laced ceremonial vines through my hair. "And your awkwardness is part of the festivities." "Great," I muttered. "I'm officially comic relief for a civilization." "You were always comic relief. Now it's just formalized." The ballroom had been transformed again, this time into a floating garden. Actual floating. Islands of flowering moss drifted between the guests, tethered by beams of harmless gravlight. Bioluminescent butterflies the size of dinner plates flitted through the air, mostly avoiding faces. Mostly. I had a new robe, courtesy of Z, who insisted I wear something shiny enough to make stars jealous. The garment shimmered with embedded stardust, which sounded romantic until I realized it shed on everything. I left a trail of sparkle like a confused comet wherever I went. Still, the energy in the room had changed. People laughed. They approached me with cautious warmth instead of cold curiosity. A few even bowed. One asked for a lock of my hair, for inspiration. "Nope," I said, ducking behind Groob. Groob, who had now decided he was my unofficial entourage, burbled protectively. "This human has molecular value and strategic absurdity." "Step back." "Thank you, Groob." I will sit on anyone who threatens your essence. Let's not escalate just yet. Queen Usurai didn't arrive until the fifth music shift. When she did, everything slowed. She wore a woven mantle of moonlight filaments over armor, not the ceremonial kind, but real plating, sleek and elegant. Her presence carved silence into the space around her, not with fear, but with reverence. Her gaze met mine across the crowd, and something in my chest misfired. "Oh no," I muttered. "Feelings." "Symptoms?" Groob asked. "I think I like the queen." Groob rippled thoughtfully. "This is inconvenient but statistically probable." "Yeah." Proceed with humor. It masks emotional recklessness. "Copy that." Dinner was served on sentient trays that hovered just above your shoulder until you acknowledged them. If you ignored one too long, it would sulk away and deliver its dumplings to someone else. I made eye contact with every plate just in case. Z sat between Usurai and me, narrating the entire evening in a whisper. "That one's Duke Flarn. He snores during diplomatic negotiations. That one's Lady Arvi. She keeps secret pastries in her cloak. And that one, he tried to propose to Mother once. She said no by smiling until he fainted. Remind me never to upset your mom. She says you do, often. And yet I'm still breathing. She says that's a mystery." Usurai cleared her throat gently. "Do not encourage him." "I live to be encouraged," I said, then immediately regretted it as her ears gave a slow, amused twitch. The music shifted, this time a dance. A traditional one, apparently, because everyone began to form pairs and glide in synchronized orbits. I tried to sneak behind a fern. No luck. Z caught my sleeve. "You must dance." "I must not. It is law." "That sounds made up." "She made it up," Z said, pointing at Usurai, who was now walking toward me with the terrifying calm of a woman who had survived 10 wars and one interstellar idiot. "I am not qualified for this," I whispered. "Use your legs in an agreeable rhythm," Groob offered. "If needed, I will create a distraction." "Only if I start on fire." Usurai stopped in front of me. "Will you dance, Protector?" "I'm a terrible dancer," I said honestly. "Then the people will love it." Her hand found mine. We stepped into the center, surrounded by swirling nobles and whispering lights. I tried not to trip. She tried not to smirk. Together, we moved in time to a melody that felt older than language. "You've become part of us," she said quietly. "I was kidnapped," I replied, "willingly by fate." "That's poetic and very non-consensual." "You stayed." I didn't argue. I couldn't. Later that night, after the party had dwindled and Groob had tried unsuccessfully to eat a chandelier, I wandered the palace gardens with Z. The stars here always looked closer, like they were leaning in to listen. "Will you leave someday?" she asked out of nowhere. "I don't know," I said, "maybe." "Don't," she said, with the solemn certainty of a child who believes words make truth. "I'm not built for palaces, Z. You're built for people." I ruffled her hair. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me." She frowned. "That's sad." "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, it is." The next morning, the tension returned. Gilex burst into my quarters before dawn with a tablet. "Read this." It was a declaration from the Krill Dominion, formal, cold, unmistakably violent. They knew Z lived, they knew she was bonded, and they knew my name. "This isn't just a threat," I said. "It's a challenge." "They're coming," Gilex said, "soon." I looked out at the city below, at the gliders drifting between towers, at the people I'd accidentally become responsible for. I thought of Z, of Usurai, of the traitors we'd flushed out and the ones we hadn't yet. And I realized I didn't want to run. "Okay," I said, "then we get ready." Gilex nodded. "You'll need to speak at the council." "Do I have to wear the shiny robe again?" "Yes." "Can Groob come?" "Only if he promises not to eat anything sentient." "No guarantees." I found Usurai in the war chamber, a vast space of shifting star maps and glowing runes, where fleets danced across curved walls in real-time projections. She didn't look surprised to see me. "I suppose you read it," she said. "I did. And I want to help." She turned toward me. "You already are." "No," I said. "I mean really help, not just as accidental protector. As someone who gives a damn." For a moment she said nothing. Then, "The council will resist." "Let them. I'm good at annoying people until they listen." A smile barely there, then she stepped closer. "Stay close, Cass, the storm is here." And I did. I stayed, because sometimes home isn't where you started. It's where you choose to stand. The Council of Oracles met once every revolution. That sounded impressive until I learned a revolution here lasted 3.5 Earth days and involved 12 hours of mandatory interpretive silence. To listen for the breathing of the stars, Gilex explained. I nodded solemnly and immediately planned to bring snacks. The war threat from the Krill Dominion had shaken the Alaran High Court. Tension crackled like ungrounded wiring through every corridor. The floating archives grew quieter. The sky bridges swayed with purposeful urgency. Even the mood-reactive walls of my chambers stopped turning warm pink around me and stayed a stiff diplomatic beige, which was somehow worse than red. Still, I had a job to do. Z needed stability. The Queen needed support. The people needed some version of hope that wasn't wrapped in royal decree or military bravado. They got me instead. Cass Brennar, the Queen announced to the Assembly, speaker for the bond. I stepped forward in ceremonial armor. Well, technically a repurposed ambassador robe that had been reinforced with kinetic mesh and covered in decorative star-stitching by Z herself. It creaked every time I moved. Try not to slouch, she'd warned. It makes the constellations look worried. The chamber was vast, cylindrical. Floating discs formed platforms where nobles stood in elegant clusters, each surrounded by translucent security domes that shimmered like soap bubbles. Usurai stood behind me on the central platform, regal and silent. I could feel her presence like gravity. I cleared my throat. Esteemed council, I'm Cass. I fix things, mostly space junk. Sometimes people, though I try not to make that a habit. A few nobles blinked. One adjusted their monocle. Yes, even alien civilizations apparently invented monocles. I'm not royalty. I don't understand your customs. I still can't tell the difference between court robes and funeral cloaks. I found that out the awkward way, but what I do know is this. I paused, looking around at a dozen curious, cautious faces. You're scared. A ripple passed through the platforms. You should be. The Krill are coming. They're not bluffing and they're not going to negotiate. They've decided Z, your heir, is a threat worth eliminating. And because she's bonded to me, I guess that makes me a target too. Lucky me. There was a nervous laugh from somewhere. Now, I've fought exactly 0 proper wars. I once threw a hydrospanner at a pirate, but I don't think that counts. Still, what I have done is care. I care about Z. I care about this place. I care about people who have shown me that compassion and science can coexist with elegance and bureaucracy. Which is saying something, because I once got into a yelling match with a vending machine. More laughter now, the tight kind but real. So here's my proposal: we stop posturing, we prepare together. Because the Krill don't care about your politics. They care that you have something beautiful, and they want to break it. I glanced back at Usurai. I say we don't let them. The vote was tense. There were long-winded speeches, dramatic gestures, and one countess who protested the phrase, "Prepare for war," on account of her tulip garden being in peak bloom. But in the end, they agreed narrowly to authorize full planetary defense mobilization. Congratulations, Gilex said afterward. You've been appointed emergency civic liaison. What does that mean? You're in charge of public morale. Oh no. I was issued a comm badge and a schedule. My first stop? A mechanics guild in the industrial sector who were working triple shifts to retrofit the city's energy grid. They were grumpy, covered in soot, and deeply skeptical of my sudden relevance. I told them jokes, bad ones. What do you call a space welder with commitment issues? I asked. Silence. A flight risk. More silence. Then one of them, an elderly engineer with grease in his hair and no tolerance for nonsense, snorted. Just once, like a kettle admitting defeat. By the end of the visit, they'd offered to name their new relay prototype after me. I politely suggested something less likely to cause system-wide embarrassment. Next stop, the Skyfleet hangars. The Alaran ships were sleek, angular crafts that folded space with elegant flares of energy and unsettling whispers. I complimented one pilot on her ship's aesthetic. She told me it was actually a sentient vessel that judged my haircut. Fair, I said. Meanwhile, Z had taken it upon herself to build me a battle companion. It had 6 legs, a wonky personality core, and a tendency to chase light reflections on the walls. This is Gromp, she said proudly. Gromp made a cheerful whirring sound, then exploded a small puff of glitter from its exhaust port. It's perfect, I said. Usurai watched the whole scene with quiet amusement. Her eyes softened every time she looked at Z, and lately they lingered longer on me. One evening I found her in the observation chamber, hands folded behind her back, watching the moon rise. The council respects you, she said, not turning. Hard to tell, one of them tried to bite me. She was testing your reflexes. Is that normal? No, but not discouraged. We stood there for a while. I'm still figuring out what I'm doing, I admitted. She nodded. So am I. You're the queen. Titles don't remove doubt, they hide it. I hesitated, then said, Z wants me to stay after this is over. She turned to me, slowly. And what do you want? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Not because I didn't know, because I knew too well. I don't want to leave, I said at last, but I'm afraid to stay. Usarai's ears twitched. Fear is a sign. Not of weakness, of significance. That's beautiful. Did an oracle say that? My grandmother, while throwing a spoon at a diplomat. I laughed, she smiled. And that right there was the moment I realized the bond that had formed wasn't just with Z. It was with both of them, with this world. That night the alert came. The Krill ships had entered the outer perimeter. The invasion had begun, but so had we. We were ready, and this time I wasn't running. I was standing, right where I'd chosen to be. The sky burned blue on the morning they arrived. Not the poetic kind of blue, no pastel dawn or shimmer through dew sentimentality. This was plasma fire streaking through the upper atmosphere, trailing from Krill warships shaped like serrated mandibles and bad intentions. Our orbital satellites flared with warning sigils. The palace walls adjusted their frequency to neutralize sonic tremors. Even the garden vines stiffened like soldiers. In other words, Monday. I was strapped into a command console beside the Queen, my hair still damp from what I'd hoped would be a relaxing shower. Instead, it became a 5-minute sprint toward the war room, with Groob following behind me yelling, "Your molecules are unstyled." We had 2 hours before atmospheric breach. That's when Usarai turned to me and said, "How do you feel?" "Prepared," I said. She studied me, unreadable as always. "You've stopped trying to leave." I blinked. Yeah, guess I did." "You've grown. Wider mostly. The palace food is extremely dense." She didn't laugh exactly. Her ears shifted, tilted forward in a subtle, unmistakable expression I'd come to recognize. Affection laced with the kind of restraint only someone who'd ruled a civilization could pull off. We launched the defense grid an hour before impact. Fleet Veilstra and Fleet Nicer deployed in layered orbit. Planetary shields hummed to full intensity. I stood on the bridge of the royal flagship, the Aurelian Spire, surrounded by pilots, engineers, and one extremely focused noodle creature, Gromp, now upgraded with targeting software and a habit of singing old Earth jingles during combat prep. I'd helped design part of the counteroffensive plan, a wild combination of plasma netting, pulse reflectors, and a stunt I called the gravity ricochet, which involved flinging empty satellites at calculated angles to redirect Krill fire into themselves. Usarai had raised one elegant eyebrow when I'd proposed it. "You're trusting this plan?" I asked. "I'm trusting you," she'd said, which was worse. The battle was beautiful in the way collapsing stars are beautiful, chaos written in arcs of light. Ships twisting like birds in vacuum ballet. The Krill advanced in their usual poetic violence, coordinated, overwhelming, elegant in their ruthlessness. But this time the Alaran were ready. The orbital satellites refracted beams. Cloaked fighters emerged from blind zones. The gravity ricochet worked twice before the third satellite exploded early and nearly took out our communications relay. "Cass," Gilex shouted over the intercom. "Why did that one detonate?" "I may have calibrated it with a spoon." "What? A very symmetrical spoon." Groob, patched into the hull sensors, reported, "Your risk-to-brilliance ratio remains statistically confusing." "I'll take it." Z stayed groundside, guarded but patched into the command channel. Every now and then, her tiny voice crackled over the line with helpful commentary. "Cass, don't forget to hydrate." "Z, I'm literally being shot at." "Doesn't change the fact you get cranky without electrolytes." "Copy that." The tide turned when Usarai led the Spire straight through the Krill formation, a move no sane ruler would attempt. She did it without blinking. I stood at her side, holding onto the nearest structural beam with one hand and trying not to look like I was calculating my own probability of death. High, very high. We breached the enemy line, deployed a magnetic disruption pulse, and disabled the Krill flagship's main cannon. In the silence that followed as systems rebooted, she looked at me and said, "Well." I blinked. "You terrify me in a good way." She almost smiled. "The feeling is mutual." The Krill retreated. Officially, it was called a strategic withdrawal. Unofficially, they'd gotten their ornate tails kicked by a planetary queen, a precocious heir, and a reluctant ex-mechanic with a habit of throwing junk at problems. The people of Alarin rejoiced, and I slept for 14 hours, in my armor, on the floor. Gromp sang lullabies the entire time, though they mostly involved vacuum cleaner sounds and ancient Earth commercials. The day after, the Queen summoned me to the solar chamber. It was the most beautiful room in the palace, open-roofed, surrounded by vines that absorbed radiation and turned it into fragrance. She wore no armor now, just soft silver robes and the weight of victory. "You've earned your freedom," she said. I blinked. "Sorry. The bond with Z has stabilized. You can leave the planet without harming her. Your duty is fulfilled." I sat down very slowly. "So that's it. You saved my daughter, my world. You owe us nothing more." My chest tightened. I looked out at the city, at the sky I had come to know like a second home. "And if I don't want to go?" "You may stay," she said softly. "As what? Royal mechanic, honorary uncle, glitter distribution technician." She stepped closer. "As part of us, not by duty, by choice." Silence stretched. Warm, not empty but full, of the laughter I'd shared with Z, of the battles survived, of the weird little family I'd somehow built from stardust and sarcasm. I rose, my voice shook a little. "I think I already did stay, a while ago, I just hadn't caught up to it yet." Usarai's hand found mine, her long fingers warm and steady. "We are glad you did." A week later, there was a ceremony. They tried to knight me. I refused the title Stellar Guardian because it sounded like a boy band. We compromised on Chief Integration Liaison and Strategic Advisor to the Crown, which still fit on business cards if you used both sides. Z made me a new jacket. It had 12 pockets. I cried in 7 of them. Groob joined the diplomatic corps. Gromp became an official palace mascot. And me? I stayed. I taught ship maintenance at the academy. Helped rebuild the relay systems. Occasionally made the Queen laugh hard enough that her ears twitched uncontrollably. We de-walked the gardens in the evening. She never said what we were. She didn't need to. We were. One evening, Z asked me again, "Why did you save me that day?" I looked at her, older now, stronger, still my star. "Because," I said, "someone needed to, and because it changed me." She nodded.